Assalamualaikum to everyone. Today we're learning and to continue learning our behavior skills. Let's get started.
Hello, Rita. Ah! What are you doing? Dear Tim and Moby, what are dreams? How does your brain make them? From Elizabeth. Cool. Dreams are one of my favorite topics. What? Anyway. The average person dreams about 2 hours a night. That's 6 years over a lifetime. But dreaming is still a big mystery. Scientists still don't know for sure how the brain makes dreams, what they are, or whether they have any purpose or meaning at all. No, not because scientists are dum-dums. The technology for studying the dreaming brain has only been around for a few decades, and it still doesn't give us anything close to the whole story. In fact, it was only in 1953 that REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, was discovered. REM is a type of sleep that happens a few times during the night. Just like its name sounds, your eyes kind of jump around a lot under your eyelids. Each REM period lasts between 10 minutes and an hour. It's during these cycles that you experience most of your dreams. I don't have to tell you that dreams are, well, they're strange. They combine images, sensations, people, and storylines that don't always make a whole lot of sense. They also tend to arouse strong emotions. Ah! Well, we still don't know what our dreams mean, if anything. People have been wondering that same thing for pretty much all of recorded history. Some of the earliest books in existence are dream interpretation guides. According to many ancient cultures, the dream world was an actual place our spirits travel to when we go to sleep. It was commonly believed that dreams were omens, messages about future events. It really wasn't until the 20th century that serious scientific attention was given to the subject. Well, it all started with the 1899 publication of The Interpretation of Dreams by Austrian psychiatrist Sigmund Freud. The father of psychoanalysts, Freud called dreams the royal road to the interpretation of The Interpretation of Dreams by Austrian psychiatrist Sigmund Freud. The father of psychoanalysts, Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. He believed that dreams are a form of wish fulfillment, representing desires that we hide even from ourselves. Freud's influence, along with that of his student Carl Jung, dominated the field of dream research for decades. Many great thinkers throughout history claim to have gone to bed with a problem and woken up with a solution. To this day, lots of experts still agree that dreams have a psychological origin. But according to a growing number of researchers, our dreams may not mean anything at all. One such theory, called the activation synthesis theory, says our dreams are created by random electrical signals pulsing through our brains. The theory also holds that dreams have no plot. Instead, our minds create a storyline to make sense of all the random images. Still, other research suggests that dreams may serve an important physical function in the brain. Like Francis Crick, one of the guys who discovered DNA's structure, thought that dreams are a way for the brain to clean out unnecessary memories that would otherwise overload our neural pathways. The real answer may be something in between all these theories. Even if dreams are random signals, they could also serve physical and psychological functions. Well, you don't have a brain, technically, so you don't dream. Sorry.
The next thing we're gonna do is
Hey Moby, have you seen my toothbrush? 10, 9, 8, 7. Hang on. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Ah. Dear Tim and Moby, my sister and I argue practically every day. What can I do to stop it? From Wayne. Hey Wayne, when you spend enough time with other people, your wants and needs are bound to conflict with theirs. Maybe you and your sister both want to use your tablet at the same time. Or you might feel a good friend of yours isn't playing fairly. When situations like these arise, you're going to feel some strong emotions. That's perfectly okay. Anger and frustration are normal feelings, and everyone has them at one time or another. It's how you deal with those feelings that counts. You may be tempted to act aggressively with yelling and name-calling, or even with violence. That can just provoke the other person to act the same way. You won't get what you want, and you'll end up in an argument or a fight. True, sometimes they'll back down and you'll get your way. But if you blow up at every little disagreement, you'll have a tough time keeping any friends. Nobody wants to hang out with someone who always gets his way. Yeah, it's tough to control your emotions, especially for kids. Fortunately, I've had a lot of practice in this department. When I get angry or frustrated, the first thing I do is stop and recognize what I'm feeling. Next, I take a few deep breaths. Sometimes I even count backwards from 10 to myself. By the time I reach 1, I'm usually ready to deal with things more calmly. Sure, just walking away is easier in the short term. But you don't want to get into the habit of ignoring stuff that bothers you. Peaceful, direct confrontation is the best way to go. Well, you can start out by explaining how you feel in a calm, respectful way. Say you and your sister are arguing over who gets to use your tablet. You might say, "When you don't give me a turn, I get really frustrated." Explain what you want to use it for. Then let your sister express her point of view. Show that you're paying attention by making eye contact and nodding. And when someone else is talking, be sure you really listen. Maybe your sister has been waiting all day to talk to her friend from summer camp. Maybe she's researching an important project for school. Think about how you would feel if she wanted you to just hand over the tablet. People are more reasonable when they see that you understand where they're coming from. You could say something like, "I don't want to interrupt you and your friend. Can you let me know when you're done?" It helps to think of the other person as your partner, not your enemy. The real enemy is the problem you're both trying to solve. Still, if things get a little too heated, you might want to call in another person to mediate the dispute. It can be anyone you trust to be fair, a family member, a friend, a classmate, even a teacher. The mediator can decide when it's each person's time to talk and make sure that everyone acts in a respectful manner. The best solutions involve a compromise. Each side gives a little ground. For example, you and your sister can set a schedule for sharing your tablet. Instead of the dispute ending with one person losing, we get a win-win situation. Oh, right. Well, Moby, when you use my toothbrush to clean your toes, I feel grossed out. I wonder how long it's been going on, and I get sick to my stomach. I see. You get carbon buildup on your toes, and it's really uncomfortable. Maybe there's a solution we can both live with.
The next thing you're gonna learn is deep breath. Let's get started. Deep breath is part of your feelings. It's okay to be depressed sometimes. And deep breath is part of your emotion system. Let's get started by deep breathing. In this video, we're learning why we have deep breath in our body. Let's get started. You will think why we need deep breath in our body system.
Hey, I heard you were feeling down. Well, look what I brought. Bubble wrap. Huh, you really are down. Dear Tim and Moby, what does it mean to be depressed? Isn't that just another way of saying you're sad? Signed, William. Well, we all know what it's like to be sad. It's a normal reaction to things that hurt you, like losing a prized possession or getting teased, or more serious losses, like the death of a loved one. You may even feel down for no particular reason, and that's okay. With time and support, sadness goes away, and you're able to move on. But sometimes, a person can't just bounce back from it for weeks, or even longer. And it gets in the way of their routine, schoolwork, hanging with friends, everything. In that case, they might have a type of mood disorder called depression. Depression changes how the brain works, making it hard for a person to feel better again. Depression can be hard to understand if you've never experienced it. It's been compared to a crushing weight, or seeing the whole world in black and white. I picture it like living with a bad, uninvited guest. Depression can take things you normally love and suck the joy out of them. It might sap your energy, making it hard to move or even think. It can make you eat or sleep way too much or way too little, or interfere with your ability to focus at school. Depression is sneaky, since it doesn't just make you feel bad about stuff that happens. It makes you feel bad about yourself, like it's all your fault. And this is how it'll be forever. That makes it hard to recognize that you're suffering from a disorder. It can be even tougher to spot in children. For kids, the symptoms or signs of the disorder might not even include sadness. A kid with depression might get a lot of headaches or stomach aches. Or they might return to behaviors they gave up a while ago. They could have mood swings or feel angry all the time. Symptoms like those can feed into harmful stereotypes. Unfortunately, there's a lot of false information out there, like that depression makes a person weird or even dangerous. These ideas can isolate depressed people from their peers and add loneliness to all the other stuff they're dealing with. It can make them feel ashamed, like depression is a weakness they need to hide. Instead of seeking help, they might think they should be able to snap out of it, like a bad mood. But the truth is, depression is a health condition, like diabetes or asthma. In many cases, it's the result of physical problems in the brain. You wouldn't tell someone with asthma to just get over it. It's the same with depression. To get better, it has to be treated. Only a doctor can look at someone's symptoms and diagnose depression. Once it's diagnosed, depression is very treatable. Actually, depression is super common. About 1 in 6 people will experience it at some point in their life. It can affect anyone, including famous people you might look up to, like J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books. Before she sold her first book, she was an unemployed, single mom struggling to pay the rent. She was also suffering from severe depression. Her experience with it inspired the Dementor characters in Harry Potter. Dementors are ghostly creatures who suck the joy out of a person, leaving them empty and hopeless. Pretty much how Rowling felt back in those days. Until she got treatment and went on to write the top-selling book series of all time. Well, scientists are still piecing together why depression happens. We know that some factors up your chances of getting it, like if it runs in your family, or if you have certain medical conditions, or a stressful home life. But obviously, there's still a lot to be learned about the causes of depression. One thing doctors have figured out is some effective ways to treat it. Many people find relief from talking to a mental health professional, like a school counselor. In some cases, they may prescribe medication. They'll probably also recommend healthy habits, like getting plenty of sleep and exercise. Right. Maybe you recognize some of the symptoms I mentioned, and you're wondering if you might be depressed. If you are concerned, talk to a trusted adult. Sometimes, depression can make a person feel so helpless they might think about hurting themselves, or even suicide. If you ever feel this way, it's important to tell a trusted adult. Same thing if someone tells you that they feel this way. You might be afraid you're betraying their trust, but remember, Depression distorts people's thoughts, making it hard for them to ask for the help they need. With help and treatment, these feelings can fade. Yeah, parents can get depressed too, just like anyone else. And that can be really tough on us kids. It's not your fault. And if you need someone to talk to, your school counselor is always a good option. Right, friends are great support too. For people who have depression, the good news is there's a lot of hope. With the right treatment, they can and will experience relief. Now, what do you say? Bubble wrap? Come on, just try it. Oh, you can do better than that. There you go. That's the spirit. Oh, okay. That's enough of that. Sorry.
The next thing we're gonna learn is why refrigerator is important in our life. Let's get started. What do you think is important? Let's get started. Yes, can I help you out if you don't want?
Moby, stop messing with the temperature controls. Huh. Dear Tim and Moby, why is a refrigerator cold? From Victor 122. Well, a refrigerator's job is to keep food cold so that the food stays fresh longer. All food has bacteria in it, and the lower the temperature, the slower the bacteria grows. Milk can go bad in 3 or 4 hours if you leave it out on the kitchen counter. But in the fridge, milk stays good for at least a week. If you freeze it, it can last for months. A refrigerator works by circulating a substance called a refrigerant through a system of pipes. The refrigerant is usually some chemical that evaporates at a really low temperature, usually around minus 32 degrees Celsius or minus 26 degrees Fahrenheit. The condenser coils on the outside of the refrigerator get rid of heat. The evaporator coils on the inside absorb heat. The compressor pumps the refrigerant gas into the condenser coils. As it pumps, the compressor raises the pressure and temperature of the refrigerant gas. The compressor coils get rid of extra heat created during this process, which is why it's so warm behind a refrigerator. With that extra heat gone, the refrigerant cools and eventually turns into a liquid. The way back into the fridge is through a little hole called the expansion valve. Inside the evaporator coils, the refrigerant is no longer compressed, so it evaporates back into a gas. Evaporation absorbs heat, like the sweat evaporating off your skin on a hot day. So the refrigerant gas inside the evaporator coils absorbs the heat from the air and food inside your refrigerator. Then it's back up to the compressor. This cycle happens continuously, keeping your food cool. So remember to put milk back in the refrigerator when you're done with it so it doesn't get all hard and... by circulating a substance called a refrigerant through a system of pipes. The refrigerant is usually some chemical that evaporates at a really low temperature, usually around minus 32 degrees Celsius or minus 26 degrees Fahrenheit. The condenser coils on the outside of the refrigerator get rid of heat. The evaporator coils on the inside absorb heat. The compressor pumps the refrigerant gas into the condenser coils. As it pumps, the compressor raises the pressure and temperature of the refrigerant gas. The compressor coils get rid of extra heat created during this process, which is why it's so warm behind a refrigerator. With that extra heat gone, the refrigerant cools and eventually turns into a liquid. The way back into the fridge is through a little hole called the expansion valve. Inside the evaporator coils, the refrigerant is no longer compressed, so it evaporates back into a gas. Evaporation absorbs heat, like the sweat evaporating off your skin on a hot day. So the refrigerant gas inside the evaporator coils absorbs the heat from the air and food inside your refrigerator. Then it's back up to the compressor. This cycle happens continuously, keeping your food cool. So remember to put milk back in the refrigerator when you're done with it so it doesn't get all hard and... Ew!
The next thing we're gonna learn is was white faces brown back then, 1949 or something like that. Let's get started.
Tell me again why we paid for this? What? My deltoids have tons of definition. Dear Tim and Moby, my grandma told me that she went to a segregated school. What does that mean? From Danielle. Well, let's take a trip to our nation's capital to talk about it. So, segregation. If you look up segregate in the dictionary, the definition is to separate or set apart from others, to isolate. Throughout the history of the United States, African Americans have been the targets of racism. They've been treated poorly because of the color of their skin. Before the 1960s, that included being segregated from white people. Public places like movies, buses and trains, and restaurants were segregated. There were separate ones for white people and people of color. Even water fountains were segregated. And usually, the facilities set aside for African Americans were inferior. Well, it all goes way back to the end of the Civil War, in 1865. Millions of formerly enslaved African Americans were suddenly free, and new laws were passed to protect their status. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed slavery. Then in 1868, the 14th Amendment was added. It says that all people have to be treated equally, no matter what the color of their skin is. But a lot of white Southerners had no intention of obeying these laws. They were angry that African Americans could now live alongside them as equals, not servants. So at the state level, they passed laws segregating public spaces. Yeah, there were attempts to fight these unfair laws. In 1892, Homer Plessy sat in a whites-only car in New Orleans. He knew he'd be arrested, and that was the plan. Plessy sued the judge at his trial, John Ferguson, for violating the 14th Amendment. The case was taken all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In Plessy versus Ferguson, the court ruled that segregation did not violate the Constitution. As long as segregated facilities were of the same quality, no law was broken. This idea became known as separate but equal. Of course, in practice, the separate areas were almost never equal. And that's how things stayed in a lot of the country for a long time. African Americans never gave up the fight against segregation. They formed the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, a civil rights organization committed to equality. In 1946, the group took on a case fighting segregation on interstate buses. Lawyer Thurgood Marshall argued before the Supreme Court and won. Marshall later served on the Supreme Court himself. The NAACP also found an ally in President Harry Truman, who desegregated the military in 1948. Meanwhile, Marshall and his colleagues began chipping away at school segregation. Case by case, they exposed inferior conditions at black schools. Brave kids, barely older than me, began staging strikes and walkouts. Then, in 1950, a 9-year-old girl in Topeka, Kansas, changed history. Oliver Brown tried to enroll his daughter, Linda, in the local grade school. But it was all white, and the Browns were African American. The district said she had to go to a black school much farther away. Mr. Brown and 12 other parents sued the Board of Education for the right to send their children to the local school. The case made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 1952. Thurgood Marshall represented the Browns, arguing that separate schools could never be equal. In 1954, all 9 Supreme Court justices decided in favor of Oliver Brown. Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka made segregation illegal, in schools and everywhere else, too. This was the first major victory in the civil rights movement, the struggle to guarantee equality for all Americans, regardless of race. Brown showed civil rights activists that the law was on their side. Well, getting folks to obey that law was still a big problem. People across the South fought against integration, the process of reversing segregation. African American students faced violent mobs just for going to school. Local police were sometimes unable or unwilling to protect these children. Federal soldiers had to be sent in to keep the peace. Yeah, it's hard to believe so many Americans fought so hard against equality. Even today, we're still dealing with the damage that segregation left behind, including racist beliefs still held by too many of our fellow citizens. Some even want to reverse the progress of civil rights and strip away laws that protect everyone. It's up to all of us to make sure that never happens. No way, I am done raking hay like forever. All right, I have to admit, that's a pretty square deal.
The next thing we're gonna learn is a very important person named Henry Hudson. Let's get started. In this video, it will explain why Henry Hudson is important. Let's get started.
Sure you want to go that way? Dear Tim and Mommy, I've heard the Hudson River was named after some guy called Henry Hudson. Who was he? Thanks. Always. Henry Hudson. The greatest explorer never found what he was looking for. He was born in England sometime in the late 1500s. Back then, planes are... Sure you want to go that way? Dear Tim and Mommy, I heard the Hudson River was named after some guy called Henry Hudson. Who was he? Thanks. Always. Henry Hudson was the greatest explorer who never found what he was looking for. He was born in England sometime in the late 1500s. Back then, planes or trains, people traded goods by boat. Traveling by sea could take forever, especially if you were going all the way to Asia. Silks and spices were worth their weight in gold, and the Far East was the only place to get them. Many people set sail to find these items during the Age of Exploration. This was a period when European explorers searched for trade routes, land, and riches. Reaching Asia by sea was cheaper and safer than the old Silk Road route. But many explorers believed there had to be a faster route than going all the way around Africa. So they turned their eyes west. They knew that since the Earth was round, if they sailed far enough west, they'd hit China. Right, in 1492, Christopher Columbus went to a teeny tiny island. But the promise of a faster route to Asia didn't die there. More than 100 years after Columbus, Henry Hudson was determined to find a way. Between 1607 and 1610, he led 4 voyages to try and find it. Everything we know about Henry Hudson's life comes from the journals he kept during those voyages. No, we don't know when he was born or much else about him. That portrait of him. And the artist made that up. We have no idea what he looked like. Well, let's just keep showing him how everyone else does. In 1607, Hudson convinced some English merchants to pay for a voyage to Asia. His idea was that he could get there by sailing north through the Arctic Ocean. No, they hadn't even reached the Arctic Ocean before icy conditions forced them to turn back. But Hudson convinced the same group of merchants to pay for a second mission. They made it a lot farther this time, but there was just too much sea ice. After this failure, Hudson lost his English backers. He turned to England's biggest trading competitor, the Dutch. Specifically, the Dutch East India Company, the largest company in the world at that time. They agreed to finance his third voyage and gave Hudson a ship called the Half Moon. But as they were sailing through the Arctic, you guessed it, ice. This time, Hudson hit upon a new plan. Instead of sailing northeast, they would go northwest. See, back then, most of North America hadn't been mapped by Europeans. Many thought there must be a waterway leading all the way to the Pacific Ocean. They called this mythical route the Northwest Passage. Hudson's new plan was to be the first explorer to find it. He led his crew down the American coast, sailing into the mouth of a river. The Mohican people who lived nearby called it the Mahicanatuck River. Today, it's known as the Hudson River. This time, he was sure he'd found the way. Hudson didn't discover the river. The Mohican knew it well, and other Europeans had been there before. But Hudson was the first European to sail as far as he did. Still, about 150 miles in, the water grew too shallow to continue. When Hudson returned to Europe, England's King James I made him an offer: leave the Dutch East India Company and find the Northwest Passage for England. Hudson agreed and set out on his fourth voyage in 1610. Seeking another entrance to the Northwest Passage, he followed an inlet into northern Canada. In July, they reached a huge body of water, now known as Hudson Bay. They spent months mapping the coastline, but couldn't find a way west. And then, winter set in. Hudson Bay filled up with ice, blocking the way out. The crew was forced to drop anchor and stay for the season. Many of them blamed Hudson for their predicament. It took until the following June for the ice on the bay to melt. And by then, the crew was starving.
The next thing we're gonna do is reading a book. Let's get started.
وأنا شعب كان حق عود بسلام ويعني مصر وفجرها إلى يوم رمضان وصيلة ودم يسير ذاك كان يقول تقول ضرب في هذا الجنون.
Let's get started.
Up to You Adventures. Character Education. Backcourt Battle by Rich Wallace. Illustrated by Chris King. Published by Magic Wagon, a division of Abner. Chapter 1. Ignore the noise. Jameer leaned forward. He hadn't played at all, but his hands were sweaty. His team clung to a narrow lead. The fans cheered as Jameer's teammate Kyle tossed in a three-point shot. Fairfield led by 5 with 2 minutes left. Hector nudged Jameer. "We're going to win." Jameer forced a smile. Kyle was playing a great game, but it was hard for Jameer to be happy. "I should be out there," he thought. Jameer and Kyle had been rivals for a long time. They pitched against each other in Little League. They'd also battled in YMCA soccer games. When Coach Sanchez named Kyle the starting point guard, Jameer almost dropped off the team. But Jameer wasn't a quitter. He kept working hard in practice. Kyle nailed another three-pointer. "Wow!" yelled Hector, leaping to his feet. The upset looked certain. Jameer stood too. The Westwood point guard raced up the court. Kyle stayed close. As the guard dribbled into the lane, the Westwood center stepped up and set a hard screen. Kyle smashed into him. The shot went in as Kyle fell to the floor. He grabbed his ankle, letting out a yell. Kyle lay on the floor until Coach Sanchez helped him to his feet. He hobbled to the bench and sneered. "Jameer," Coach said. Jameer gave Coach a puzzled look. "Get in there," Coach growled. Jameer reported to the scorer's table. "I'm in for Kyle," he said. Jameer nodded to the Westwood point guard, Trey Freeman. He was the best player in the league. Freeman stared him down. The scoreboard read Fairfield 53, Visitors 45, 1 minute 27, 4Q. He wanted this chance, Jameer thought. Tight game, undefeated opponent. Talk about pressure. Jameer scrambled to get open, but Freeman stayed on him. Derek bounced the ball Jameer's way. Jameer turned and dribbled with Freeman in his face. Jameer reached the sideline. Freeman had him trapped. He stopped dribbling. He scolded himself. Derek waved his arms. Jameer threw the ball, but Freeman tipped it back. He ran to the ball. Freeman got there first, taking it in stride and swooping for the basket. Freeman leaped for a layup. Jameer had the shot. The whistle blew as the ball fell through the net.
جهادك محل إلى الله يا للجهاد يا لو جهاد محل لو جهاد
مسكتني
قرما لجهاد وسؤال بان السويدي الجهاد وكلمات معبرة ضد بهان كلمة الجهاد وبذل الجهد في سبيل الله وإلهي درتي وبحيه جهد قالوا أضوك ما يدل عليه وتربني ابن القيم الجوزي في ذلك
Henry Hudson's name can be found on schools,
كتاب الجهاد في غزوات نبي مكة ورمي
in fact,
صدق
there's no
يتضمن
broader name for
الجهاد
Henry
فوق
Hudson
الإسلامية
than for any other person
مكاسوة
in
تقول
history.
بالعرب آيات القرآن إلهي ولو شئنا لبعثنا في كل قرية نذيرا فلا تطع الكافرين وجاهدهم به جهادا كبيرا انت كن بالعربية آيات أصيل أي صدحية طبعا قيبان قيبان مركو صدحية طبعا قيبان قيبان أي صدحية طبعا كامر طبعا بحبه عليه الصلاة والسلام مكتقا وقليبون ساد رادين يهيبون يا أفضل مهاجم مجاهد ثبتنين تسوى دينون فهذه 13 مرتبة من الجهاد ومن مات ولم يغلب ولم يحدث نفسه بالغلب مات على شعبة من النفاق وصدحية ظلم ويرينك صدحية مكان من دقلي وايه
I shut Freeman down all day, Kyle said.
إنك تسوي بغير وايه ليك شو
Hector gave
إيه
Jameer a
قولي
light
قولي يقولوا حكوم قولي الشعب من النفاق
he said.
وحيث ويدين
Jameer
دليلة
made the inbounds pass this time, bouncing the ball to Derek. Freeman stayed close as Jameer ran.
العالم محمد نور قوي الشيخ الصومالي
Jameer thought. Shake up.
وسؤالها كجواب
Jameer
يا
cut to the
وحيد
corner. Then he ran along the baseline
جهاد
of the
قبول في
basket.
كل
He
حالات
mirrored every step. Derek was
النبي
in
عليه الصلاة والسلام
Westwood
مراتب
players
مصامرة
help.
يقول لي
Jameer
مرة
moved
وفلا
around behind Derek and yelled
مرة
for the ball.
ديتنا مرة وفلا مرة أمري يمر لو واجب يقولوا لي عيد والبلا تقالما عيد بلان خلاصي
Said the ref, reaching for the basketball.
وحول الجهاد كحالات في سمكة عموم المسلمين طبعا لقوا في كل حالاته وفرض
Kyle yelled from the bench.
يقول عموغي سوى مروا فرض كفاية هي مروا فرض عين
Where was Freeman? Jameer darted toward him.
لكن وحول الجهاد كمقاومات بوبة هي مقاومات الجهاد بوبة هي وحوها يسبب لهجرة
Jameer
القلب
shadowed him. notch
أما
left and step to the
إن
right.
لك إيمان
Took a
تربية
quick pass before Jameer
أما
could recover.
بناء القاعدة الصلب ما يسميه ابن القطب
Fairfield's lead was only
سيد
2
فيا
points.
محمد
And now
سلام
Jameer had
حارس
to bring the
تلبز
ball up
الغبير
again. Derek passed. Jameer
وحاو
pivoted.
تلمامي قاعدة الصلب ولا هلا
Jameer recovered the
ولا
ball and elbowed Freeman. Step up and
دبت
do
أنا
something
وحولي
good.
فيجر الجسدية ما كنت يكتبوني
Dribbled hard. Pass to Derek.
إلا هلا قاعدة ولا والله
Quick,
تقال
and he knew how to get
نقول
clear.
مرة وريت أنا دجاج في التكوينية دولة السيوف السيامة قاعدة ولا ده وكاين غلابة
Pass
كروها
before Jameer could recover.
ثانيا وحلو صدحات بوي وحلو بهاي المجتمعية دول كي مركز يسلها له
And now Jameer
انت
had
اللي
the
بس
ball up
عسكري
again.
ودي له بحنا لا
Derek passed. Jameer
يا
pivoted.
الله ردوا لي يا
The
ابوي
ball away. Jameer recovered the
وراكم
ball
ما
and
نخرم يا
elbowed
ابوي
Freeman.
وقاتلوا المشركين كافة كما يقاتلونكم كافة
He dribbled hard. Pass
قاتلوا
to
الذين
Derek.
لا
Slipped
يؤمنون
away from
بالله
Freeman.
ولا باليوم
Return
الآخر
pass.
ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ورسوله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون
Coach said as the team
يا
gathered
أيها
around him.
الذين آمنوا قاتلوا الذين يلونكم من الكفار وليجدوا فيكم غلظ الكفار وأهل الكتاب
16
والمشركين
seconds.
صدق يقول القرآن
Advancing to
كتلمة
force overtime. A 3-point
أما
veteran
المنافقين
loss.
قاب كانوا الله ربك على ما هو يجب القرآن كتلمة والقتال كان كورنا الجهاد والماء القتال في سبيل الله
Jameer stumbled backward as he ran into the Westwood Center.
تبتلي تصور غير في الشعوب تمام تمسلم كاهو
The ball bounced off the rim and
وجهل
fell to the side. Jameer
بين
let out
لكم
a sigh of
الضوء
relief. The horn blew.
ضدكم ما يقارن يبين لي
Why did
قارن
that feel like a win?
ومسلمون جهل أبوي
Chapter 2.
صدق دامنا ما قلع
Jameer walked
دبتنا لا
slowly
درب
to the
الماء
locker room.
كاتوا الله يبي
Celebrated around him.
علامة محمد قوي
It's tough,
حكم دخلنا
Victor said. He fell into step next to Jameer.
علامة الشريف
Going in ice
عبد
cold on
النور
the bench in a tight game?
عليه رأي كلام
Jameer shook his head.
ما كان كلمة الله القضايا الفكرية وعمر بعناينا كورنا وكاي سجل بسنة وهي فقه وين أمور ما ينعي إن الملك روح يوقف في أمانه إذا ما حرمينا أن تصير الثوابت والمتغيرات في الجهاد الإسلامي مع ثابت الجهاد الإسلامي ضام بنانين مرة وفصل وغير عامة يعني رتل محاصل متغير اجتهاد كالبلاط وأن
Jameer
سكر
hung around.
الكتوريكا
Where's Kyle?
بسبب حوية الجهاد
Parents
وقول
said he needed
إنقاذ
x-ray.
وفرنت
Derek
وروسا
said, that ankle
مثل
was
وقت
really
ثابت
swollen.
وأن جيت وقالنا دمو قد
A
على
lot of action.
مسكرة وح متغير وحياة بنك أختي على إستاذ مطلع سجل هذه غير الموضوع لكن عموما على تجربة العالم الإسلامي
Did all
طبعا
right tonight.
فرق عودة أيه هو مثل أمات بعض دقالتي مثل حركات دقالتي
We're tied for
في
first.
سوريا
Today's win
حركات
did it.
دقالتي
Hector said, trying to cheer up his friend.
أما وحكا دعينا
I'll play
ولو
if Kyle is out. Hector
في
continued.
أفغانستان حركة ما يدقال من وين شعب
Now you can
دقال
quit.
شعب
But he didn't feel confident. He needed to admit it. Kyle had done a great job guarding Freeman. Jameer had
لا
it.
زالت في وليس
See you, Jameer said as they
لكن
reached the
اسمه
street.
يكتب
Hector ran off. I need to burn some energy, he called. Sitting on the bench doesn't exactly tire me out. Come over later, Jameer called back. Camp, social studies test
أوكي
tomorrow.
قلنا أنا أسكت أخصب
Jameer wasn't worried about the test. He'd review them at table after dinner.
وذروة سلام الإسلام
Jameer's older brother, Micah,
عمل كجهادي
to the refrigerator.
ونهاية المطاف بالنسبة لجميع الجهود الرامية إلى نصرة
Jameer
الإسلام
replied, Where's mom?
وما شوت البيضة
Micah took out a carton of
جهود
eggs.
الأسلوب بين إنه هو قرار إسلام
Eggs
في
again.
الحكومة الإسلامية
I had
الغربية
one for breakfast. They're easy.
تقع علق إسلام طواه هنا بوس كود أنت تقول بنيان كورما يا فضل فاهم
There's a carton of
كويسة
rice back
أنت
here.
مرة ولا فضل طبعا بكارة يدرس كده يا فضل
Something.
هنا ده ترى فضل شان الدولة الإسلامية للصح هذا هو أو كده
Jameer slid open the produce bin.
لكن وحنا انت عملك السياسي قال مصالح بدل المنصفة مفاسد بدلنا وفيد
Did you play?
انهيارات بدلنا ورجع على وفاد البادكة
Important minutes too.
دولة إسلامية جاي نرادين حب مسلمة قدر رايح شم ويانا اسمي ميس
Let me get rid of my stuff, Jameer said.
جهادنا مكتوب بالجنوب مكحوك الله لا وقت قال يتكتب
Small but cozy.
النص
Two bedrooms.
أو الشهادة.
his mother and his brother.
إلهي وحلي يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. وحلنا جهادكم أكم مرتبة عليه طوابع متغيرات أولي وحسوا ما يسبدلين هي وحسب البدل أولي وحلوا باهيين بدل لك فكروا هي وحطة صوان لصمياء أولي هذه لك سقوة أنشاء صوت المامي جزء كم من الإسلام كوحا كرسل حديث العين يا آيات القرآن كواتي حديث العين وحلا يا مب طوابع الجهاد في كلامك أما الضغال كطوابع دي سوا حكمنا مثلا المسائل المسلمين كلهم بدنا من شباب بالجلسات سلف يا أي مدى دمو حيسكوها فصنت أحكام الإسلام كي واجب كاعدة جدا إلا رضا على ما لا يحق أو نقايا ساسي وحقوكم تمي بيرا إجماع الصحابة دقال كيلو مقاضي ما نعيد في زكاة الجيدي يقول لكن سلف يسكوك لأبدي مكونهم كفر لتكونهم يعني يزيدون حكم إسلامي يعني قتل وبغاة أيين وقال قالوا لي سمي قالوا لي فمثلا يعني السلف كتير لكن أنا رد على الله إجماع لكم كنت طبيعي سيد رادي حافظ ابن حجر له شرح يوم إليه أولا البخاري باب وقدرية باب قتال من أبى قبول الفرائض وما نسب إلى ضده وباب قتال باب قتال من أبى قبول الفرائض وما نسب إلى ضده أنا رد على الله كويس جدا فرق يوحي لا نسبية بداود ابن حجر مكو شرحين وحوري فإن جواز قتل من امتنع من التزام الأحكام الواجبة والعمل بها إمام مالك في موطئه وحكول يشاء الأمر عندنا في من منع فريضة من فرائض الله تعالى فلم يستطع المسلمون أخذها منه كان حقا عليهم بهذا ابن تيمية وحوليه كل طائفة خرجت عن شريعة من شرائع الإسلام الظاهرة المتواترة فإنه يجب قتالها باتفاق أئمة المسلمين قاتلوهم حتى لا تكون فتنة ويكون الدين كله لله لكن وحي الله ما يوحى كان يوحى يوبا عنها استيفاء الشروط الشرعية إن الشروط هذا شرعي قاوضة فقال له كل يوم شروط هذا شرعي قاوضة وايد هذا مشرك صوبا بحي لما قال لهم يصيروا مشركين يا مسلمين لو وكل السعودية حركة الإسلام ما تكون شيئا ما هتو النبي ولا النور جماعة النبي وعيد المثال سناد وممثل جماعة النبي وحي يا جماعة المسلمين هذا يسمى جماعة من المسلمين بقى مسلم كلمة لنا النبي قال المسلم هذا مثال لسعودي وحي قال إن النبي يشوفه لكن هذا واحد طائفة من الطوائف الإسلامية وحي رقم من المسلمين واحد شوقك وقع حتى لو مسلمين فاهمين يقع حتى لو مسلمين جاهلين لما ما يشوف عند كسوة الرئيسان قالوا أما أهل العقائد يعني علمانية وكفر أهل العقائد لكن أهل العقائد وحكسوها الرئيس طائفة كل الجهلة من الشعب مسلمون لكن هو طائفة جاهل كإسراف وكو قبني يا علماني عن جهل يقول هذه الإسلام بشيء قلت كذا يقول يسوى راعي يمثله منافقة هذا نوع حكولين سنوات منافقة نفسي عنه وهذا حتى تلوجي ذكر المنافقة مع مش الجوول يلوي منافقة نمدي سنو يعني جهل يسوى حتى سجار غبي نمدي إن واحد منافقة كان راعي الشغل محي أدوى أسكي مسلم كيف صحافة إذا waxaan idin kula talinayaa nusuusta calaa iطlaaqiha inaydan istidlaalin ayna duruufta iyo zamaanka iyo makaanka iyo dadka iyo biicada wax badan u fiirsataa nusuus ilfuqahaa hadday tay oo shabaabku markay rabaan inay xujo ka urursadaan ibnu taymiya ibnu lqayim ibnu xajar xafaada ay soo ururiyaan aqwaashooda laakiin aan la soo raacin wadcigii ay ku yidhaahdeen iyo darfiga waxa kala jireen waa kala nooc iyo wadciga lagu qabto inaad ku dabaqdo waa nin shalay tilmaamaya qowlka sheekhu haddii waqtigiisa la dhaafiyo iyo meeshiisa إن يتجلس في سوكرة كرت مشاكل ترابط وحلاقي مركز أصل كوفي إراقة الدماء بجدادين وأمر عظيم في الإسلام وارن آدوي وحتى قانونين إنه مجتمع إسلام كون نسبة شيكتو لكن جاهلين لا عنه وحمول بما مركز إن التحقق ضوء اسكوه بسكوه كانت نفسك كجوين سيني يكي حق مدين نفسك لك تريني وين أبوكا وإلا شرع الإسلام الواحد المام حدود انتباهات كلمة مصرية يعني هذه هدي شبه الإسلام ميشنات حدود يسير دوري كريم وأنا دوتي كريم إنه وين أتكهبك الإسلام سوى المقيم إن الله من صنع في ما الله رانا شخصيا ووصيلا وفقا محسنة لكن بأرى لنا شيئا يسوى ما حيثا ما هم يلك عن طول قال يا مسلم لي ما هم قال يا مسلم ايه وحويا ما هو صحابة يوكي ملاحظ السنة قال له غير ورمي ايه تلمامي وقت اللي قال دونان إصلاحيتون دونان يو إسلام وقلبيتون دونان يو وقلب وهو مجرى وحالي هدي شبهة شرطوقف كحق لو قمال إلا الدلو شبهات في حتى هديت هاي شبهات أنا شبهات جهلية حتى هديت مثلا ابن تيمية وحكوت المالية الجهمية وقوع عذر دارية لو قلت بقولكم لكفرت ولكني لا أكفركم لأنكم تجهلون وحاليا هذا أنا أقول هذا بيروح أنا فعلا سواء قال لي هذا بتقدر الله وقال لي لكن يدوب الجهل وايد ما يستبوا لي ابن القيم أيام يوقفون حبالها بري أيام الله قال يصير هي مكاسور لا نكفرهم من جهلهم وابن القيم أيام يوقفون حبالها نقوش راح قال عبد الله عزام في إحدى كتبه كون بي ولادين استغاثات كلا إيمان هي حبالها بري ما قال يصير مكاسور لا نكفرهم من جهلهم ابن عبد الوهاب أي واحد يدكن عابد قبة الكوارث ما قال يصير لا نكفرهم لقلة من يعلمهم قال يصير ما إنه وحقوا العدة وحقا شيخنا الشريف عبد النور وأنكم اسمين لينك وقال ما أنت صوماليا إفتاء وأنك علم يرين علماء ما أنت فتوطة لكن صوماليا نكا يعيد كما أي أوحيني إذا أسئلة نوع عسيل لو يجيني أي وحقة المام يددك الصوماليات الكلمات يقول الجهل لا قصدا جهل يقصد يقول وامن أن نرجع بالغاية الحركة الإسلامية نمي قالوا ولي البينات كلهم في الطبقة أما البينات الرسم يفضل في من نفسه لذلك يقول وحن كعب سنية إن البشان هداد بالليسان من حمل علينا السلاح فليس منه والقول سمحي سنف عبد النور سنة بالنسبة أكلم بصوب وانا ولينا يا طيب عندي عدتي فيه وحلايا ضدك إنه نحسو عنا ما هددك رمير ما قال لي إسلام قرمير ووحنا نحسو عنا محل ذاتو كل يدرك تغيرين إلهي يقول فورا ده وحنا مبلاش فورا يا ويكولا عيد السفل ما دفع لك هالدنيا مايا وين ما بيصير واحد كلام جاي كده ولا تقولي حضنا هذا كدلي يا كتر أنا كم حكيم بيحكي وتنتهي تيجي شيء نيجان حكي لو رواق يلا لأن نبغى قرآن ما شيخان قرآن في الشيخ وين بنو قاضي نبوي يقول ما قابل الله قاضي ما كان أنا قرآن أنا هي كتاب الله وحلاي استيفاء الشرعية وين الله يمعد الدجال كاسر إذا كم ديدني إنه عاصر دل الله دجال ما يعلم الشرعي لكن وين وطا محي وهي هذه الشريعة لا يوجد يسوي وين وطا الشريعة وحكم إذا يعلم دليل عدم الإضرار بالأمة إن أنا كيني وحكم إذا ما يدعم إن مخصوص كل قارة وفيرصو علماء الفقه وحركة يقول كور رمية
Next time we're gonna do the paint character the fight
وإن بدل لي وجوب وقاضي مالي وقال لي مسلم كشرط كذب شيوخ بيك بهيوم شيوخ وحياكم وقعارا هذا كان يكتب مسلمين حال يلي ومثال الست يا الفقهاء يعني ست عمل وربطه هذا الحد ما كنت يصب الشعب ذاك ورد وهو قلب الشيوخ عليه جهات وحيانين باهي وحكم من السلامة الراية راية الله قال الله يا هنا شيء من السلام لما كمل راية تحت الراية عامية هنا عند قالك الوقل راية عسكرية وقومية وروح الله من هنا عند قالك الوقل من قتل تحت راية عامية ينصر العصبية ويغضب للعصبية فقتلته الجاهلية من الوقت النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام إذا كان في فرص قال الله إنه الدل فيه الجاهلية يقول له وقت المعمل وحياضها علماء إلين الشرعي لا يوضع أنت وحكم إذا غلبت المصلحة غلبت المصلحة وفي سطع بيته أعماش الجهاد بماها أعمال انتحارية على أعمال نصف شهادة قرى ما هي حل الدنيا ما دقال في القلب قدر على شهادة ولا ما هذا الكلام كلمة حق والقول يرشي هذه شهادة وانتهى حقها قرين من هذا حق لك يعني تبلي وين يسير لا شهادة دون الشوح يعني كشهادة أي صحيح حق ويوم خالد بين الدولار حي يتبلي وين يسير ما هو كل من أنا هو تقول يتبلي وين يجاري صحيح لكن شهادة قرآن معها مصلحة تتجهات كله واجب حال لو يريد تعلقون إسلام كنا فاض وقيمة نفط وواحد وقيمة وين إسلام محل كلام كله نفط حرب أضع أما هذا يقول إسلام تلقى كل الدنيا إلا الضد بغنبا ما يشكل أنا يمحل نفط الله أجرادين يقوضه وين مصلحة تتكبر بيشوح أقل مصالح المحاكمة إظهار الدين محاكمة إلى الدين تكون نظام أنت يكون عليك المتكوى وحاكمة بأس الكافرين اللي يقول علينا أظن قال لي كنت في رأيك ويكون يا مصطفى يا محمد علي وحاكمة الدفع عن المستضعفين إلا الدفاع عدة المسلمين المستضعفين الله محال دليلة إلى يقول وقاتلهم حتى لا تكون فتنة ويكون الدين كله لله إظهار الدين وهدف وضع على الله من قاتل لتكون كلمة الله هي العليا وهدف وضع على الله فقاتلوا في سبيل الله لا تكلف إلا نفسك وحرض المؤمنين عسى الله أن يكف بأس الذين كفروا عسى الله أن يكف بأس الذين كفروا وهدف وضع على الله وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان وهدف وضع على الله إذن جهاد وين مسالح في حقيقتنا وين استمرارية في موقرتها مناها الجهاد في واحد جولة هي جولتين كل مانية وهذا المصالح إذا وحكى لك من توقع الضغط وحكم إذا بين تأمين زرار الضعفاء والمسلمين إن تستوحى مصلحة الله إذا دقيات كذا لسكو خلافك يعني مصلحة محل من الجامع كلا واقي بينه كلا واقي آسيا إن واحد كرة في يعني أنا كرة في الوقت ومثال اجتهادية لكن إنه هدف ثلاثية هو حوارات جريرية ومن أهداف الجهاد مكمل وحلا يا أخواتي في الله وحوضاها إلا هذا الجهاد وحيابات صابت كفوها شيطانا باقمين وحكرا وحيابات صابت كفوها تحت ولاية عامة وقدرها هنا مثل الإسلام وللمسلمين ابن قدامة رحمه الله وحليه وأمر الجهاد موكول إلى الإمام واجتهاده حديث إمام لوايب إليه ولما وحليه ويلزم الرعي طاعته فيما يراه من ذلك لكن هذه إمام لوايب والزمان وضعه اعتماد السلطان كوين وكبحه السلطان الشرعي لوايب أمورته وحي موكولة إلى أهل الحل والعقد أما ضد المسلمين رأيي هي علمي هي عقلي أو صحيحة جهات في الولاية أمور متغيرة أصلا قواعد وقوة شوية أهم تتم متغيرة وكل بس حمشة إعداد العدة الرقمية وأعدوا له ما استطعتم من قوة إعداد